Welcome to Inside Audit, IIA Belgium's podcast. In 2021, the IIA started with research and benchmarking as input for the revision of the IPPF. 3 years, countless working groups, 1,600 completed surveys, 19,000 specific comments, and 120 pages later, we have reached one of the most important milestones of the profession in the past decades. Since January the 9th, the global internal audit standards are published, and they will become effective 12 months later. Because of the significance of this milestone, we will dedicate 5 episodes of this podcast, one for each domain of the standards, with our 3 distinguished guests. Our first guest is Kat Seeuws. She's Vice President Standards and Guidance at the IIA Global. Previously, she was the CEO of IIA Belgium and held several positions in the field of internal audit and internal control. Our second guest, John Bendermacher, is the Chief Audit Executive of Euroclear Group and President of ECIIA. He is a former member of the IIA Global Board of Directors, the IIA Global Advocacy Committee, and was the member and chair of the IIA Netherlands Board. Last but not least, Nicolas Denewet is an internal audit manager at the National Bank of Belgium and a board member at IIA Belgium. He has over 15 years of professional experience in financial services and has worked on internal audit in various capacities. He has also worked for the International Monetary Fund, where he assessed the governance, risk management and internal controls of the central banks worldwide. Currently, Nicolas is participating in the translation of the new IIA standards. Kathleen, John, Nicolas, welcome in today's podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. It's always nice to be here back in Belgium to catch up with our Belgian internal audit friends.
Yes, Cedric, very happy to be here.
All right, Kathleen, in pure text, it's the shortest of all domains, the purpose of internal audit, because it's just one page. But indirectly, it may contain the most info. What would be the most important aspect in the purpose of internal audit?
Domain 1 is indeed the most important one, the shortest one, but the most important one. And when it comes to the most important thing within the domain 1, I would definitely say the first sentence. The first sentence is what we call our elevator pitch. It contains all the key features of what internal audit stands for. So it's a very good communication tool for an internal auditor to explain within your organization what internal audit stands for and what we do as a profession. It contains all the key features, as I was mentioning. There is a reference to value creation, value protection. Risk-based is again in there. As you may recall, in the exposed version, the risk-based concept was not there, but we did receive quite a lot of pushback there. So the Standards Board decided to have that concept again in the elevator pitch, in the first statement. And I think this makes sense because this is indeed a very important one and a key feature where we distinguish ourselves from other functions within our organization. There's a reference as well to the operational things that we do, providing assurance and advisory engagements, and then also important insight and foresight. I think in the past we had a more, let's say, retrospective side of internal audit. So this is the more modern version. We need to provide more foresight and have a proactive role for our management and for the board. Besides that first sentence, there's also these 2 boxes where you will see some additional information, key features as well. The first one, the left one, is all about the benefits. So you can call that box a bit the value proposition of the internal audit function, referring there to the core of our activities. We provide assurance and advice on governance, risk management and controls. You see there the public interest perspective showing up, something that was introduced based on recommendation of the IPPF Oversight Council. And then the right one is then all the preconditions, the things that need to be in state in order for your internal audit function to be effective. Not so many new things there, but indeed key aspects in order to be effective. So referring there to the positioning, the independent positioning, objectivity, and compliance with the standards. So indeed a short domain, but I would say it's the summary of all the rest. All the other principles and standards will be based, of course, on the purpose of internal audit.
Kathleen, you already mentioned the concept of public interest. Nicolas, it's new. What do you think that it means?
It's an interesting one. And I'm still warming up to the concept of public interest, and I will explain my journey so far, which is only a few months. When I first read the draft standards, there was no definition of public interest. And I was a bit taken aback because in my view, internal auditing has always been inwards looking, hence internal audit as a position in comparison with external audit. And then, because there was no definition, when in doubt, Wikipedia. So there was a definition of public interest, which is about the welfare and well-being of society as a whole. And then it got me, I started thinking about, do we as internal auditor has a role to play? And I think we have. And I'll give you a few examples. Of course, if I take my organization, which is the easiest one, I come from a public sector. So of course, we provide services to almost every citizen in the country and organization. So it is of the benefit to every Belgian citizen to know that the NVB has an internal audit which provides assurance on governance, risk management, and control at the NVB. But you could also that apply to, say, a bank. It is in your interest, whether you are a client of that bank or not, to know that there is an internal audit function at a specific bank that has some kind of oversight. It could be the same thing for, say, a nuclear agency or healthcare. You want to know that a hospital has an internal audit and they have, backup plans in case there is a loss of power. What was also interesting is that when I was looking into the concept, it is already embedded in the code of ethics of accountants, of external auditors. And I will just quote it because it's quite interesting. So that's from the code of ethics, the standard of the IFAC, which is the International Federation of Accountants. And they say that a professional accountant responsibility is not exclusively to satisfy the needs of a client or an employing organization. It's also broader than that. And I think maybe internal audit should also slowly go into that direction, not think only we report to the board, audit committee, management, but we also have to think about what is the impact on society as a whole. But again, it's a new concept, and I think it will take some time for people to adjust and to adapt.
Yeah, maybe, Nicolas, I think you make a very important point because I'm the oldest in this group and I'm an internal auditor already for 25 years. And we were always very anxious to be somewhere outside of the company. But now with governance codes and regulators expecting internal audit, your point is clear. But also the whole environment now changing with ESG and makes the assurance chain of ESG become part of internal audit as well. So we will go into the public interest by default.
Is that the main reason, Kathleen, why it was added? Because it's so relevant nowadays?
Yes, indeed. It was very intentional to add that concept in the domain 1, which is the purpose. So it is linked to the why and the what that we do. And to your point, John, I think indeed that it makes sense because in our profession, we address these risk areas such as ESG, but also fraud, which have a much broader impact on the broader society than just in our organization. So beyond the boundaries of our organization. I think personally that it's also good because it enhances and broadens our value proposition so we can explain better to the outside world as well what we do and what we deliver, because working on these domains also then strengthens the trust for external stakeholders. The accountability is stronger, so I think it makes sense and it's a value adding to have it there.
Thank you, Kat. I would like to talk about topical requirements as well. The newest component of the IPPF will ensure that all internal audit functions, large, small, private, public, they all apply consistent audit methodology when assessing the effectiveness of GRC of a particular topical area. Important to know is that the use of topical requirements will be mandatory when an internal audit function scopes an audit engagement that includes the topic covered. John, this is a very important change. What do you think of these topical requirements?
Well, let me first of all say that I'm very happy with the new standards because I think it creates a much better level playing field for all the internal auditors all over the world. Having said that, I have some doubt about the topical standards. And that's for three reasons. The first question is who makes the choice? What is a topical standard? And are you complete for all of these? The second question would be who is keeping this guidance up to date? Because normally these are fast moving areas. So how do you ever keep this up to date? And thirdly, to keep it proportionate and also easy to use all over the world, it's by default probably too high level. If you look at the differences in regions between the US, Europe and Asia, for instance, only looking at ESG, it is almost impossible to have a valuable topical standard in place. So that's my doubt.
So it might even be better to provide regional guidance, in your opinion, than central guidance?
Well, I think that would be a very effective add-on to these topical standards.
Well, the intention there for the IIA is really to provide guidance in these areas that are very common in our risk domain that we need to tackle. Other organizations do the same thing. They have standards on fraud, on IT, all these common risk areas. So I think it is important to make sure that we are a global organizations, we have global standards, that we address these things and make sure that there is a coherent approach for that we understand the same things there, that stakeholders as well can rely on the quality. So if you do an IT audit in Asia or in Europe, that you can expect the same level of quality there and that we have a common understanding. So I do think that it makes sense. However, I fully agree that there are additional challenges, like for instance, to keep that updates will be a challenge. To prioritize them in the development is another challenge. However, we have already thought about that. And I think that members there is the key stakeholder there. We have to make sure that we address the needs of the members there. So indeed, things that we will consider.
Nicolas, in your opinion, which topic should not be missing as a topical requirement?
It's a difficult one because, and I would first raise a point I've already raised in the past. I share John's concern. There is a choice made by the IA regarding which will be included in the topical requirements. I am asking myself whether those align with the evolution of the profession. And if I think, for example, on the annual survey, the risk in focus, how does that align with what we know are the hot topics now? And also in the risk survey, we ask what will be the hot topics in 3 years' time. And I think the last time I did the exercise, there was a bit of mismatch between the result from survey and the topical requirements, which will be published by the IA. That said, there are many topics that can be covered. And it can be either topics which are well known. For example, I would say fraud. The reason being, even if it's well known, there might be internal auditors somewhere in the world that need guidance. On the other side, we should also be looking into covering new hot topics. It could be everything that is CSR, so corporate sustainability reporting, or ESG, whatever you call it. It can be new technologies, including RPA, robotic process automation, AI, artificial intelligence, and so on. But again, I think it would vary from auditor to internal audit function to another one. And so I'm not clear about how the choice will be made, the prioritization will be made of this is of interest for everyone.
Yes, and to clarify there, indeed, risk and focus is one of the sources that we do use to prioritize, as well as membership surveys. The Global Assembly is also a very important one where we try to poll a bit what is popular there. But to clarify as well is in the beginning there was the intention to address emerging topics with these topical requirements. And then after reflection, the Standards Board realized that this was not realistic because for providing mandatory guidance, you would have to have a more mature topic because you need stable legislation, stable regulation. We believe that ESG is already going to that stage, but for instance, topics like AI, we receive a lot of questions. Will there be topical requirements for AI? I believe that is just too premature. We still have to wait a bit on how this risk area will evolve and how legislation and regulation will evolve in that area.
Then I would like to take a step back. Before the 5 domains, even before the glossary, there are the fundamentals of the global internal audit standards. And one of the paragraphs that piqued my interest is demonstrating conformance with the standards. And just like Nicolas, I like to quote something. So, in case of circumstances that may necessitate adjustments often related to limited resources or specific aspects of sector, industry, or jurisdiction, in these exceptional circumstances, alternative actions should be implemented to meet the intent of the standard. Kathleen, the intent of the standard. What does this exactly mean? And does this not open the door for all kinds of exceptions?
Well, it's a very good one. And the Standards Board had a lot of discussion there, even on the concept and the terminology of that concept. At a certain point, they were talking about comply or explain, but very intentionally, they did not use, or they did not want to use that, because it would give the perception that you have a choice to comply or to explain, which is not the case, because compliance is still the rule. It's mandatory to comply with the standards. However, we did sense that we have raised the bar now for the profession with our standards, that we don't want to also push internal audit functions into the non-compliance zone because of these might be stricter requirements. For instance, we have a lot of comments coming from smaller internal audit functions as well as from public sector entities that it's just not possible to comply with the letter of the standards for all the standards. And so there we try to find, or the Standards Board did try to find a more practical solution. You can develop your standards and strive for the more ideal world, but on the other hand, you have to be realistic as well. So that's why there was this room for as well complying, but also explaining why in certain circumstances you cannot comply, but with the condition that you will have to explain why you cannot comply and take additional measures to indeed, as you mentioned, comply with the intent of the standard and the principle. I think that's a very important one. And there, documenting this will be key, because this will then be assessed by your quality assessment, by your quality assessor. This person will then look into why you have not complied, whether the rationale is okay, and also whether the additional measures that you took are sufficient and adequate and appropriate.
John, there are also 2 paragraphs on small audit functions and on the public sector. Should these groups be treated differently?
Yes, I certainly think they should be differently treated. I was involved in the Netherlands in the quality assurance reviews a number of years ago, and what we learned is if you treat small audit functions the same as larger audit functions, it's just not fair. They have a longer path to maturity, and they sometimes need to be creative and have alternative solutions to implement the standards, like working together with other internal audit shops or using external firms to help them in kind of peer reviews and that kind of things. So that's a reason to give them a little bit more time and also more flexibility. And the public sector is totally differently organized in a governance perspective. So there, even the names that we use in the standards need to be translated into what is applicable for them. But I think the public sector is doing that. At least in Europe, the public sector is very active now in looking at the new standards and translating them to their own use. But I think with giving them a little bit more time and looking differently at them, we will make them much more willing to comply with the standards and with the intent of the standards.
I just wanted to add something. I totally agree with what Kat and John have said. What I do hope is that when we talk about quality assessment, that the IAA would issue some guidance or update their trainings towards quality assessors to avoid that they would be strict when they perform the assessment and take it as the law, as the letter of the law, and they would indeed interpret the standards depending on which internal audit function they evaluate.
Yeah, and that is a perfect bridge to my next question, because it goes about the external quality assessment. Kathleen, the use of should in the considerations, how will this be assessed during quality assessments?
Well, first I would like to emphasize again that the considerations where you find all these shoulds are not mandatory. So they will not be used to set the bar for compliance. The requirements are the ones that are mandatory and that you will have to comply with. However, you know now that a very important change is that quality is now no longer just compliance, but there is this performance perspective. And I think that there the considerations will play an important role because there you will find all these preferred and good practices that can show or that can demonstrate where you are enhancing your internal audit functioning. So I think that when assessing and demonstrating good performance, you can use a lot of these things that are in the considerations there. But we will have to see on how we will fit that into the quality assessments. And to your point there, Nicola, as well, we are updating our quality assessment manual. And indeed, it's something that we are now looking into whether these considerations, these good practices could serve maybe to measure the maturity level and then linking it to the performance perspective, because that's going to be a very challenging one to keep it as objective as we can.
Any final thoughts on the purpose of internal auditing, fundamentals of internal auditing, or the topical requirements?
I would maybe say take the time to read it again, and let it sink in. It's very brand new as compared to the previous one, which we all know and we're used to it. There are new terminology, so take your time and let it sink in. We're not up and overnight.
You have 1 year to comply with. The
That as
standards
well.
will become effective on January 9th, 2025. So 1 year to go.
Okay, and that brings us to the end of our first episode around the purpose of internal auditing. If I may conclude, we are serving the public interest, whether it's directly or indirectly, but we are definitely serving the public interest. The topical requirements are only for mature topics, and we should treat small audit functions differently as well as the public sector. And altogether we can raise the bar for the profession. So thank you very much for this first episode, Kathleen, John and Nicolas. And if you want to know more about this topic, you can go to iiabelgium.org or theiia.org to stay tuned for the latest news around this topic. Thank you very much.